The look on Tyler's face when his credit card bounced at the Ferrari dealership was something I'll never forget. Standing there with his girlfriend, humiliated and confused, while I watched from my modest Toyota parked across the street. Just hours after he'd drained what he thought was my entire life savings, I made one phone call that revealed the truth. The retirement account he'd emptied was merely my decoy fund, less than 2% of my actual wealth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 40 years of raising a child, and my son never once bothered to question what I did during those boring teacher conferences I attended across Europe and Asia. If he had, he might have realized those trips were actually meetings with investment, partners where I directed a portfolio worth millions, a fortune I'd built methodically since before he was born. I remember the exact moment I decided to keep my wealth separate from my family life. It was during Tyler's 16th birthday party, when he boasted to his friends about becoming rich through smart investments and connections, rather than wasting time with books and homework like my old man. The dismissive way he laughed when mentioning my teaching career told me everything I needed to know about how he viewed honest work and patient wealth building. So I smiled and maintained the facade, curious to see whether he would eventually develop the discipline and character to manage significant wealth responsibly. I created a modest retirement account that aligned with a teacher's salary, the only financial resource my family knew about, while my real assets remained carefully protected in diversified holdings across 3 continents. My name on private, banking documents, my signature authorizing international transactions, my ownership stakes in businesses from Singapore to Switzerland, all completely unknown to the son who lived in my home for 2 decades. Too self-absorbed to notice the subtle indicators of my financial acumen that surrounded him. Truth be told, I never planned to use my hidden wealth as some elaborate test. The separate financial worlds I maintained were primarily for security, and to ensure my family lived within reasonable means rather than becoming dependent on easy money. But when my sister Caroline called that Tuesday morning to tell me Tyler had shown up at her house asking for her account details to surprise me with a gift, I couldn't help but wonder what emergency would prompt such an unusual request. He seemed nervous, Richard, Caroline whispered into the phone. When I told him I'd need to check with you first, he got agitated and said something about needing to move quickly on an investment opportunity. I remember setting down my coffee cup, the morning crossword puzzle before me suddenly forgotten as a cold realization formed in my mind. Did he mention anything specific about this investment? I asked calmly, my thoughts already mapping out the possible scenarios. Some crypto thing, Caroline replied. He said it was guaranteed to multiply within days, but only if he could secure a position immediately. He mentioned he'd already committed his own savings and just needed a bit more capital. In the 48 hours that followed, as Tyler made increasingly desperate attempts to access family funds, I learned more about my son's financial recklessness than in 40 years of parenthood. The credit card charges, the loan applications using my personal information, the steady withdrawal of funds from the joint account I'd maintained since his childhood. Each revelation landed like a physical blow. Yet I remained perfectly composed as I tracked his movements through banking alerts, monitoring the steady drain of my decoy retirement account. This fund, holding approximately $187,000, represented what might be reasonable savings for someone of my age and apparent profession. Tyler had helped me set up online banking for it years ago, insisting I needed to join the modern world, while simultaneously ensuring he had access to monitor, and apparently control, my finances. Freeze the teacher's retirement account. I instructed my actual financial advisor, Bernard, my voice steady despite the disappointment churning inside me. Let it show a 0 balance when accessed, but flag any transaction attempts for the next 72 hours. And prepare a statement of my Cayman holdings. I may need to activate some of those resources. Of course, Mr. Harrison, Bernard responded. using the formal address he maintained even after 20 years of managing my international portfolio. And if Tyler attempts to access any other accounts? He doesn't know they exist, I replied, a complicated mixture of sadness and strategic clarity settling over me. But increase security protocols on everything just in case. I need to understand exactly what he's involved with before deciding next steps. The drive to my modest suburban home gave me just enough time to process what was happening. Darshafs. Decades raising a son who now thought nothing of emptying what he believed was my entire life savings, funds meant to support me through my retirement years. 4 decades of teaching values, of modeling financial responsibility, of living modestly despite having the means for much more. 4 decades apparently wasted on someone who viewed me as nothing more than a financial resource to be exploited. As I pulled into the driveway of the 3-bedroom ranch-style house I'd owned since before Tyler was born, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The man staring back wasn't broken or defeated. He was calm, resolute, and preparing to administer perhaps the most important lesson of his teaching career. The house was quiet when I entered, but Tyler's car was in the driveway. Since his business venture had failed 6 months ago, he'd moved back home temporarily while he reorganized his finances. I'd welcomed him, hoping the setback might instill some humility and perspective. Instead, it seemed to have made him more desperate and entitled. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I found him in his childhood bedroom, hastily packing a suitcase. He startled when he noticed me standing in the doorway, then quickly composed himself with an artificial smile. "Hey, Dad. I didn't hear you come in," he said, casually draping a shirt over the open suitcase. "How was your day at school?" "Illuminating," I replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Caroline called me." A flicker of something, guilt perhaps, or merely calculation, crossed his face before he laughed dismissively. "Aunt Caroline needs to relax. I was just trying to organize a surprise for your retirement party next year." "Is that what you're calling it now?" I stepped into the room, noting the expensive new watch on his wrist and designer luggage that certainly hadn't been purchased on the meager income from his part-time consulting work. "And does this surprise involve the $187,000 you transferred out of my retirement account 3 hours ago?" The color drained from his face, but he recovered quickly. "Dad, I can explain. It's a short-term thing, a guaranteed investment opportunity. We're talking triple returns in under a week." "We?" I questioned, my voice remaining calm. "Me and Alyssa," he admitted, referring to his girlfriend of 4 months. "She's got connections in this exclusive investment circle. They needed a minimum buy-in, and I knew you had those funds just sitting there doing nothing in that sad little 2% interest account." I nodded slowly, taking in both his words and the complete absence of remorse in his expression. "And you didn't think to ask me first?" "There wasn't time," he insisted, becoming animated. "These opportunities don't wait, Dad. That's why the returns are so huge. I was going to surprise you with the profits, set you up for a much better retirement than you could have managed on your own." The condescension in his tone was remarkable, as if his 4 failed business attempts somehow made him more financially astute than me. I walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd deliberately chosen to raise my family, despite having the means for much more. "What's the Ferrari for, Tyler?" His expression froze. "What?" "The Ferrari dealership sent an automated approval notification to my email about an hour ago. Apparently, my retirement savings were directed to a holding account for a Ferrari 488 Pista. Is that part of my retirement surprise too?" "Dad, that's..." He stumbled over his words. "That's just a temporary allocation to secure the deal. Once the investment matures..." "There is no investment," I stated flatly. "There's just theft." His face hardened, the pretense dropping away. "It's not theft if it's family. You've had your time, lived your small, safe little life. This is my chance to actually do something meaningful, to live up to my potential. By stealing your father's retirement savings? I asked, genuinely curious about his rationalization. By leveraging underutilized resources? He shot back. That money was just sitting there. Do you know what people like me could do with capital like that? People with vision and connections? I almost smiled at the irony. My son, lecturing me about leveraging capital, completely unaware that I had orchestrated investment strategies across global markets that would make his exclusive investment circle look like a child's lemonade stand. The Ferrari is non-refundable. Once the paperwork is processed, he continued, a hint of defiance returning to his voice. The deal is already in motion. In a few days, when everything pays off, you'll thank me. You'll see I was right. I checked my watch, a modest Seiko that had served me reliably for years, despite having a collection of timepieces worth more than this entire house stored in a private vault in Geneva. Tyler, I need you to call Alyssa. Right now. Put her on speakerphone. Something in my tone must have finally penetrated his self-assurance, because for the first time, uncertainty flickered across his features. Why? Because I want to hear her explain exactly how my retirement savings are being invested, and I want to hear it right now. Reluctantly, he pulled out his phone and dialed. After 4 rings, a woman's voice answered, music and conversation audible in the background. Hey, babe, did you handle that thing with your dad? She asked, her voice slightly slurred. Alyssa, my father is here. He knows about the money, Tyler said, shooting me a warning glance. There was a pause, followed by a laugh that held no warmth. Well, that's awkward. Did you tell him about the sick returns we're going to get him? I'm trying to, Tyler replied tensely. Dad wants to know exactly how his money is being invested. Another pause. Look, it's complicated financial stuff. Your dad wouldn't understand. No offense, Mr. Harrison. Try me, I said simply. It's a leveraged cryptocurrency arbitrage situation, she replied, the rehearsed terminology flowing. Too smoothly. We're exploiting price differentials across multiple exchanges with insider timing information. 20 years of teaching economics made the red flags in her explanation immediately apparent. That sounds fascinating, I said. Which exchanges specifically? All the major ones, she hedged. Listen, I'm actually in the middle of a meeting with our investment group right now. Tyler can fill you in on the details later. The background noise suddenly clarified as someone near her shouted about bottle service. Your investment meeting is at a nightclub, I asked. The call ended abruptly. Tyler stared at the phone, then at me, his expression cycling through embarrassment, anger, and finally a kind of desperate bravado. She's networking. That's how these deals happen. I sat down on the edge of his bed, suddenly feeling every one of my 65 years. Tyler, there is no investment. There never was. The money you took, money I spent decades saving on a teacher's salary, is being spent, not invested. You don't know that, he insisted, though his conviction was wavering. You don't understand modern finance. Things work differently now. Things work exactly the same as they always have, I countered. Only the terminology changes. Madoff called it split-strike conversion. Before that, Ponzi called it postal reply coupons. Now your girlfriend calls it leveraged cryptocurrency arbitrage. But it's all the same empty promise. Impossible. Returns with no legitimate explanation of methodology. He paced the room, agitation building. So what if she's treating herself a little while setting up the deals? She deserves it. And so do I, after years of struggling to make it while you hoarded your savings and refused to invest in my businesses. The accusation stung, despite its inaccuracy. I had, in fact, privately funded his first legitimate business attempt through an angel investor shell company. When he squandered that opportunity through mismanagement, I'd decided any further ventures needed to succeed or fail on their own merits. Tyler, I need you to understand something very important, I said, my voice quiet but firm. That money you took represented safety and security for my remaining years. It wasn't hoarded. It was protected. There's a difference. You're being dramatic, he scoffed. You own this house outright. You have your teacher's pension. You'll be fine. And that justifies theft? I asked. It's not theft, he shouted, his composure finally cracking. It's my inheritance anyway. I'm just accessing it early to make something of myself while I still have time, instead of ending up like you, small, safe, and utterly forgettable. His words hung in the air between us, revealing the vast gulf in how we viewed not just money, but life itself. In that moment, I made my decision. I see, I said, standing up. In that case, I think it's best if you continue packing. I'd like you to leave tonight. Shock replaced his anger. This clearly wasn't the reaction he'd expected. You're kicking me out? Over a temporary financial disagreement? I'm acknowledging that our values are fundamentally incompatible, I corrected. Him. And yes, I'm asking you to leave my home. Fine, he snapped, resuming his packing with jerky, agitated movements. When the investment pays off, don't expect to see a dime. And don't call me for help when you're eating cat food in your 80s, because you couldn't see a good opportunity when it was handed to you. I watched him for a moment, this stranger who shared my DNA but apparently none of my principles. One more thing, Tyler. I've already frozen what remains of the retirement account. The dealership will be notified that the funds for the Ferrari were obtained fraudulently. Panic flashed across his face. You can't do that. The deal is binding. They'll come after me legally. Yes, I agreed. They probably will. As I turned to leave, he called after me, his voice shifting from anger to pleading. Dad, wait. I admit I should have asked first, but you don't understand what this could mean for me. For us. Alyssa has these connections. Alyssa spent $30,000 of my money at Bergdorf Goodman this afternoon, I interrupted, showing him the banking alert on my phone. Another $40,000 is currently being processed at a nightclub in Manhattan. Does that sound like investing to you? The color drained from his face as reality finally began to penetrate his delusions. She did, I stated, simply. And you enabled her by stealing from your own father. For the first time, genuine shame seemed to register in his expression. I'll fix this, he promised, his tone suddenly earnest. I'll get the money back somehow. I just need a little time. No, Tyler, this isn't something you can charm or talk your way out of. There are consequences to actions, especially when those actions harm others. So that's it? He asked, desperation creeping into his voice. 40 years as your son, and you're throwing me to the wolves over one mistake? This isn't one mistake, I corrected him. This is the culmination of a lifetime of choices that reflect your character. And no, I'm not throwing you to the wolves. I'm simply stepping aside and allowing reality to teach what I apparently could not. With that, I left him to his packing and retreated to my study, closing the door behind me. Only then, in the privacy of the room lined with modest academic awards and family photos, did I allow myself to feel the full weight of disappointment and grief. The son I had raised, the boy I had loved and nurtured, had become a man who valued things over people, appearances over substance, and easy money over integrity. My encrypted phone, the one Tyler knew nothing about, vibrated with a message from Bernard. Confirmation requested. Proceed with Phase 1 containment measures. Phase 1 was our prearranged protocol for financial damage control, involving everything from credit freezes to legal notifications. I responded with a simple confirmed and set the phone aside, feeling a strange calm settle over me alongside the sorrow. Tomorrow would be soon enough to determine exactly how this lesson would unfold. Tonight was for acknowledging that sometimes, loving a child means allowing them to experience the natural consequences of their actions, no matter how painful that might be for both of you. As I heard the front door slam and Tyler's car start, in the driveway, I opened my laptop and navigated through several layers of security to check one of my private investment portfolios. The screen displayed a balance that would have rendered Tyler speechless. $17.3 million in just one of several holdings I maintained across multiple financial jurisdictions. For 4 decades, I'd lived modestly on a teacher's salary, channeling my considerable financial acumen into private investments while maintaining the appearance of a dedicated but unremarkable academic. The wealth I'd accumulated wasn't merely for personal comfort. It was earmarked for philanthropy, for community development in the town that had embraced me as a young teacher, and yes, eventually for Tyler, should he ever demonstrate the character worthy of such responsibility. That day now seemed further away than ever. Creating and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, please hit that subscribe button. It means the world to us. Now, let me tell you what happened next. The following morning, I arrived at school as usual, greeting colleagues and preparing for my advanced placement economics class as if it were any other day. For 37 years, I'd guided students through the principles of financial markets, monetary policy, and ethical business practices. The irony that my own son had failed to absorb these lessons wasn't lost on me. As I wrote the day's topic on the whiteboard, long-term investment strategies versus speculative trading, my encrypted phone vibrated again. A message from Bernard. Ferrari dealership notified. Transaction reversed. Legal representative standing. See, good. The first step in containing Tyler's financial recklessness was underway. I had no desire to punish my son, but neither would I shield him from the consequences of his actions. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come wrapped in the most painful packages. Midway through my lecture, as students diligently analyzed historical market data I'd provided, the classroom door opened. Principal Martinez appeared, her expression tense. "Mr. Harrison, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could I speak with you for a moment?" I assigned an analytical task to my students and stepped into the hallway, already suspecting what this might concern. "Richard," she began, her voice lowered, "there's a detective here asking about your son and some potentially fraudulent financial activity. They need to speak with you right away." I nodded, maintaining the calm demeanor my colleagues had come to expect from me. "I understand. Can you arrange coverage for my class?" As I followed her to the administrative offices, I mentally prepared myself. This would be painful and public, exactly what I'd hoped to avoid through decades of careful financial discretion. But Tyler's actions had forced this confrontation into the open. 2 plainclothes detectives waited in the conference room, their expressions professionally neutral as Principal Martinez made introductions before excusing herself. "Mr. Harrison," the older detective began, "I'm Detective Collins. This is Detective Rivera. We're investigating a series of potentially fraudulent financial transactions involving your son, Tyler Harrison, and your personal accounts." "Yes," I replied simply. "I expected you might be contacting me." They exchanged a quick glance, clearly surprised by my composure. "Sir, are you aware that approximately $187,000 was withdrawn from your retirement account yesterday afternoon?" "I am. My son accessed the account without my knowledge or permission." Detective Rivera leaned forward slightly. "And you're willing to state for the record that you did not authorize these transactions?" "That's correct. Furthermore, I have documentation showing exactly when the unauthorized access occurred and what happened to the funds afterward." I removed a folder from my briefcase, documentation Bernard had sent to my secure email overnight, and placed it before them. This contains timestamped transactions showing the money being moved from my retirement account to a temporary holding account, then disbursements to a luxury car dealership, Bergdorf Goodman, and a nightclub called Elysium in Manhattan. None of these transactions were authorized by me. The detectives reviewed the documents, their professional demeanor unable to completely mask their surprise at my preparedness. "Mr. Harrison," Detective Collins said carefully, "in cases like this involving family members, victims sometimes initially report the activity as fraudulent, but later decline to press charges. I need to ask if you intend to pursue this matter legally." The question hung in the air between us. Did I want my son to face criminal charges for what he'd done? The pain of that possibility was substantial. Yet I thought of my students, young people I'd spent decades teaching about ethical decision-making and accountability. "I understand this is difficult," Detective Rivera added gently, "but the amounts involved here would make this grand larceny a felony offense. Your son could be facing serious consequences." I met their gaze steadily. "I'm aware of the potential charges, and yes, I intend to pursue this matter to its legal conclusion. My son made a conscious choice to steal what he believed was my entire life savings. There must be consequences for such actions." They nodded, returning to their professional questioning. Where was Tyler now? I didn't know. Did I have any information about the young woman, Alyssa Crawford, who appeared to be involved? Only what I'd observed during their 4-month relationship. Was I aware of any other accounts Tyler might have accessed? No others existed in my name locally. As we concluded, Detective Collins handed me his card. "We'll need you to come to the station to provide a formal statement. And Mr. Harrison, I'm sorry about this situation. In my experience, these family financial cases are often the most painful." I thanked them and returned to my classroom, where 22 students were analyzing the distinction between investment and speculation, a lesson my son had failed to grasp despite years of exposure to the same principles. By mid-afternoon, word had begun spreading through the school that something was happening with Mr. Harrison's son and the police. Colleagues offered concerned glances or brief supportive touches to my shoulder in passing. I maintained my professional composure, completing my teaching duties while internally processing the public unraveling of my private life. After the final bell, I declined well-intentioned offers of company or assistance and drove directly to the police station, where I provided a formal statement about Tyler's unauthorized access to my retirement account. The process was methodical and emotionally draining, transforming a family tragedy into an official record of betrayal. "We've put out an attempt to locate for your son," the desk sergeant informed me as I prepared to leave. "Based on the evidence, the district attorney will likely proceed with charges regardless of whether he comes forward voluntarily, but it would be better for him if he surrenders himself." I nodded, thanked him, and walked to my car, feeling the weight of the day settling over me. As I sat behind the wheel, my encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming call from Bernard. "Phase 1 containment complete," he reported without preamble. "All unauthorized transactions have been flagged and reversed where possible. The luxury store is cooperating fully, though approximately $18,000 in merchandise had already left the premises. The nightclub charges are more complicated. They're claiming the services were rendered and consumed." "And Tyler?" I asked, starting the car. "No direct contact, but our sources indicate multiple attempts to access various financial institutions using your personal information. All were blocked by the security freeze we implemented." I pulled out of the parking lot, heading not toward my empty home, but to a nondescript office building on the outskirts of town. Has there been any unusual activity regarding my actual holdings? "None," Bernard assured me. "Your primary portfolios remain secure and uncompromised. The offshore accounts show no access attempts." "Good. I'm on my way to you now. I think it's time for Phase 2. Phase 2 was a contingency we had established years ago, not specifically with Tyler in mind, but for any situation that might require me to activate resources beyond my teacher identity. It involved accessing certain secured documents, making specific notifications to financial partners, and preparing for a potential shift in my public profile. Bernard's office occupied the third floor of a professional building that also housed accountants, insurance agents, and small law practices, the perfect anonymous setting for the man who quietly managed substantial international holdings for a select clientele. His receptionist, who was also his security screener, recognized me immediately and buzzed me through to the inner office. Despite having worked together for over 20 years, Bernard still rose formally when I entered, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from his meticulously organized desk. "Richard," he greeted me, his Swiss accent still detectable despite decades in the United States. "I've prepared the Phase 2 documentation as requested." He placed a secured tablet before me, displaying account statements, asset allocations, and legal structures that represented the true extent of my financial reality, a stark contrast to the modest retirement account Tyler had emptied. "The total position across all holdings is approximately $42.6 million as of this morning's market adjustments," Bernard noted. "The charitable foundation structure remains secure at $27 million, and your personal accounts hold the balance." I reviewed the information carefully. For decades, I had lived on roughly 20% of my actual income, channeling the rest into investments and the foundation I had established to eventually support educational initiatives in the community that had welcomed me as a young teacher. Only Bernard and a small circle of international advisors knew the full extent of my financial position. "Has there been any contact from Tyler directly to your office?" I asked. "One call this morning," Bernard confirmed. "He identified himself as your son and claimed to be helping you reorganize your retirement planning. When Miranda informed him that we had no client by your name, he became quite insistent. She followed protocol and neither confirmed nor denied any relationship with you." I nodded, appreciating once again the discretion that had protected my privacy for decades. "And the legal representation?" "Ms. Winters is on standby. She's prepared both the criminal complaint support documentation and the restraining contingencies you requested." Joanne Winters was a formidable attorney who had managed the legal structures of my holdings for nearly 15 years. Like Bernard, she was one of the few people who knew both versions of Richard Harrison, the dedicated high school teacher and the shrewd financial strategist who had built a fortune through methodical, ethical investment across global markets. "Thank you, Bernard." I handed back the tablet. "I believe it's time to implement the transitional planning we discussed last year. The educational foundation should begin its public phase." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You're certain?" "Once announced, your position as founder and primary benefactor will necessarily become public." "I'm aware," I replied, feeling a strange mix of resignation and relief. Recent events have made it clear that maintaining complete separation between my teaching life and financial reality is no longer practical or necessary. For decades, I had kept my wealth private for several reasons. To raise Tyler with values untainted by excessive privilege, to maintain the authentic connections I cherished in my community, and to protect the pure joy I found in teaching without the complications wealth often introduces to professional relationships. But Tyler's actions had forced a reckoning that perhaps was long overdue. My retirement from teaching was already planned for the end of the academic year. The foundation had been structured to begin its public charitable work once I stepped back from the classroom. Tyler's betrayal had simply accelerated a transition that was already in motion. "Very well," Bernard agreed, making notes in his precise handwriting. "I'll contact the foundation board and begin the announcement preparations. The timing aligns with your retirement, which should help manage the narrative." As we finished reviewing the necessary documents, Bernard hesitated, then spoke with the directness that had always characterized our professional relationship. "Richard, If I may, this situation with Tyler. I've observed your relationship with him over many years, and while I've sometimes questioned your decision to shield him from knowledge of your financial position, I've respected the principles behind that choice. I nodded, acknowledging both his observation and the implicit question within it. However, he continued carefully, I find myself wondering if maintaining this deception, however well-intentioned, may have contributed to the current circumstances. The question struck at the heart of the doubts I'd been wrestling with since discovering Tyler's betrayal. Had my decision to raise him as the son of a teacher of modest means, rather than as the heir to a substantial fortune, somehow backfired? Had I unknowingly created the conditions for his resentment and entitlement? I've been asking myself the same question, I admitted, but I keep returning to this. Tyler stole what he believed was my entire life savings, money he thought I needed for basic security in my old age. That action reveals a fundamental character flaw that no amount of financial disclosure could have prevented. Bernard nodded thoughtfully. A fair assessment. And now? Now we proceed with phase 2, I replied, standing to leave. The truth emerges, for better or worse. As I drove home through the darkening evening, I found myself reflecting on the parallel lives I had maintained for so long. The teacher who drove a Toyota and clipped coupons, who lived in a modest house and worried visibly about retirement planning during faculty discussions. And simultaneously, the investor who made decisions affecting millions, who held private meetings with financial ministers and fund managers during those summer teaching conferences abroad. Both versions were authentic parts of me. I had never seen my teaching career as a cover story or a front. It was my true vocation, the work that brought me profound fulfillment. The wealth had been, in many ways, an unexpected side effect of financial instincts that had proven remarkably prescient over decades. When I arrived home, the emptiness of the house seemed more pronounced than ever. Tyler's hasty departure had left subtle signs, a forgotten jacket draped over the kitchen chair, mail addressed to him on the side table, the lingering scent of his cologne in the hallway. Physical reminders of an absence that felt both painful and necessary. My encrypted phone buzzed with a text from Detective Collins. Attempted contact with subject unsuccessful. Credit card activity places him in Atlantic City as of 6 p.m. Will update as situation develops. Atlantic City. Gambling, no doubt. A last desperate attempt to recover or multiply what remained of the money he had stolen. The pattern was so predictable it was almost textbook, the kind of case study I might have presented to my economics students as a cautionary tale. I moved through the quiet house to my study, where decades of student papers, teaching awards, and family photos created an environment that reflected only half of my life experience. From behind a row of economic textbooks, I removed a leather-bound volume that appeared to be an academic journal, but was actually a biometric safe. Inside was a second encrypted phone, one that connected me to my international financial network. 3 missed calls from Hong Kong, a message from my Singapore investment group, and an alert about a potential acquisition opportunity in emerging green technology markets. The other half of Richard Harrison's life, waiting patiently, as always. I set the phone aside without responding to any of the notifications. Tonight, those matters could wait. Instead, I opened my laptop and began composing an email to Principal Martinez, requesting a meeting the following morning. It was time to inform her of my intention to make my planned retirement effective at the end of the current semester rather than the full academic year. The careful separation I had maintained between my teaching life and financial reality was coming to an end sooner than planned. Tyler's actions had initiated a cascade of revelations that would necessarily transform how my colleagues, students, and community perceived me. Better to manage that transformation intentionally than to have it unfold through rumor and speculation. As I completed the email, my regular phone rang. Caroline, likely calling to check on me after yesterday's revelations about Tyler. Richard? She began without preamble. Have you heard from him? He called me about an hour ago, sounding desperate. Said something about a misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. I haven't heard from him, I replied, though the police believe he's in Atlantic City. Did he ask you for money? Her hesitation confirmed my suspicion before she reluctantly answered. He said he just needed a small loan to fix things with. You. Said he made a mistake but could make it right if he could just get a little capital to leverage, I think was the word he used. Caroline, I need you to listen carefully, I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm. Tyler stole what he believed was my entire retirement savings. He's now facing potential criminal charges. Any money you send him now will simply disappear into the same hole. The best thing you can do, for him, not just for me, is to refuse. Criminal charges? She gasped. Richard, he's your son. Surely you wouldn't press charges against your own child? The question reflected the same instinctive response I'd been wrestling with internally. The protective parental impulse to shield one's child from consequences, even when those consequences were both deserved and potentially instructive. I've spent 40 years trying to teach Tyler about integrity, responsibility, and the difference between earned success and taking shortcuts, I explained. Perhaps this is the lesson he needs when all others have failed. But your retirement money, she persisted. I know how carefully you saved all those years. What will you do now? The question hung in the air, presenting the perfect opening to share the truth I had kept from even my closest family members. But some habits of discretion are difficult to break, and I found myself demurring. I'll manage, I assured her. My primary concern right now is ensuring Tyler understands the seriousness of his actions. After ending the call, I sat in the quiet of my study, surrounded by the artifacts of my teaching life, contemplating the transformation that was about to occur. By this time next week, my colleagues would know that the humble math teacher who had borrowed lunch money on occasion was actually the founder and benefactor of a multi-million-dollar educational foundation. My students would discover that the man who had taught them about ethical financial decision-making had quietly built a fortune practicing those same principles. And Tyler would learn that the father he had dismissed as financially naive, whose retirement savings he had stolen without remorse, was in fact a man of substantial means who had chosen modest living out of principle rather than necessity. The revelation would change everything: how people saw me, how they interpreted my past actions, perhaps even how they would interact with me moving forward. The thought brought both apprehension and a curious sense of liberation. My encrypted phone buzzed again with a message from Bernard. Foundation announcement documents prepared for your review. Legal team standing by for Phase 2 implementation at your word. Tomorrow would begin the transformation from Richard Harrison, dedicated teacher of modest means, to Richard Harrison, financially independent philanthropist. The carefully maintained separation between these aspects of my life was coming to an end. The alarm chimed at 5:30 a.m. as it had every school day for the past 37 years. Despite the emotional turmoil of recent events, I maintained my morning routine with practiced discipline. Coffee brewing while I reviewed lesson plans, a quick breakfast while scanning financial news, and a brisk shower before dressing in one of the modest but well-maintained suits that defined my professional appearance. This morning, however, carried a weight of anticipation that disrupted my usual calm. Today marked the beginning of a significant transition, the deliberate dismantling of barriers I'd maintained between my separate lives for decades. My meeting with Principal Martinez was scheduled for 7:15 a.m., allowing us time before students arrived. As I drove to school, I rehearsed different approaches to explaining my situation. How does one casually mention that the retirement funds your son stole were merely a decoy and that you're actually one of the wealthiest individuals in the state? The school parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived. Just a few dedicated teachers' cars and Principal Martinez's practical sedan occupying their usual spaces. I gathered my leather portfolio containing both my lesson plans and the foundation. Documents Bernard had delivered late last night, physical representations of my dual identities now literally held together in a single container. Martinez was already at her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed emails. She glanced up with a warm but concerned smile as I entered. "Richard, good morning. Are you doing all right? Yesterday seemed incredibly difficult." I appreciated her direct approach. Elena Martinez had been an excellent principal for the past 8 years precisely because she balanced professional accountability with genuine compassion for her staff. "As well as can be expected," I replied, taking a seat across from her desk. "But there are some matters I need to discuss with you. Matters that relate to both yesterday's events and my future at Westridge High." She removed her glasses, giving me her full attention. "I'm listening. First, I'd like to modify my retirement timeline. Instead of finishing the academic year, I'd prefer to conclude my teaching duties at the end of this semester." Concern crossed her features. "Richard, if this is about yesterday, about the police and the situation with Tyler, please know that everyone here supports you. No one is judging you based on your son's actions." "I appreciate that, Elena, truly. But my decision isn't driven by embarrassment or discomfort." I paused, carefully selecting my next words. "Rather, recent events have accelerated plans that were already in motion." I opened my portfolio and removed a glossy prospectus bearing the logo of the Harrison Educational Foundation. For the past 15 years, I've been developing a charitable foundation focused on educational access and excellence. With my planned retirement, the foundation was scheduled to launch its public phase next year. Circumstances have made it practical to advance that timeline. She accepted the prospectus with evident confusion, glancing between the professional document and me. "I don't understand. You've been developing a foundation while teaching full-time?" "Yes," I confirmed simply. "And that relates to the second matter I need to discuss with you, something that will likely become public knowledge soon, and I'd prefer you hear directly from me." I took a measured breath. The retirement account Tyler attempted to empty represented only a small portion of my actual financial resources. The truth is, I have significant means that have allowed me to establish this foundation with an initial endowment of $27 million. The number hung in the air between us. Martinez stared at me, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning comprehension. $27 million, she repeated slowly. "Richard, are you saying you're wealthy? All this time?" "Yes," I acknowledged, feeling strangely vulnerable despite the objectively positive nature of the revelation. "I've maintained a deliberate separation between my financial position and my professional life as an educator for personal reasons. That separation is no longer practical or necessary as I transition to leading the foundation full-time." She opened the prospectus, scanning the mission statement and organizational structure. Her eyes widened as she reached the page listing the board of directors, where my name appeared as founder and chairman. "I don't understand," she said finally. "You've driven the same car for 15 years. You bring leftovers for lunch in reused containers. Last year, during budget cuts, you offered to forego part of your salary to preserve the AP Economics program." "All true," I confirmed. "My financial position and my lifestyle choices are separate considerations. I live simply by choice, not necessity." "And no one knew? Not even among the staff?" "No one at Westridge," I confirmed. "A small circle of financial and legal advisors, of course, but otherwise I've maintained privacy." She shook her head in amazement. "Richard, forgive my bluntness, but why? Why live on a teacher's salary when you clearly didn't need to?" It was the question at the heart of my choices. one I'd asked myself repeatedly, especially in recent days. I offered her the most honest answer I could formulate. Because teaching isn't what I do for income, it's what I do for purpose. The classroom is where I find meaning, connection, and the opportunity to contribute something valuable. My financial circumstances are largely the result of investment decisions that proved fortunate over time, but teaching is where I've invested my life intentionally. Martinez nodded slowly, beginning to process this revelation. And now the foundation. We'll continue that purpose on a different scale, I completed her thought. The foundation will support educational initiatives, teacher development, and student scholarships throughout the district and eventually beyond. My personal experiences in the classroom have shaped its mission profoundly. She closed the prospectus, studying me with new eyes. The familiar colleague of 8 years, suddenly revealed as someone partially unknown. The district will want to recognize your contributions, especially with this foundation announcement. I shook my head firmly. I'd prefer to minimize any ceremonial focus on me personally. The foundation's work should be the emphasis, not its founder. Always the humble teacher, she remarked with a small smile. Even when you're revealed as a secret millionaire. Especially then, I corrected gently. My colleagues have valued me for my teaching, my mentorship of students, my contributions to curriculum development. I wouldn't want that authentic connection diminished by financial considerations. She nodded understanding. I'll respect your wishes, though I can't control how people will react once this becomes known. She glanced at the prospectus again. When will the foundation announcement occur? The formal press release is scheduled for next week. However, given yesterday's events and the likely police investigation involving Tyler, certain aspects of my financial position may become public sooner. Martinez's expression softened with genuine concern. And Tyler? Has there been any resolution there? Not yet, I acknowledged, the parental pain momentarily visible despite my composed exterior. His actions have consequences that can't simply be erased, regardless of my actual financial position. The school day that followed felt surreal. Teaching. My usual classes while carrying the knowledge that a significant transformation in how colleagues and students perceived me was imminent. I delivered lectures on market efficiency and opportunity costs with my customary thoroughness, all while aware that soon these same students would discover that their economics teacher had quietly amassed a fortune applying these very principles. During my lunch period, rather than joining colleagues in the faculty lounge as usual, I retreated to my classroom to check messages. My encrypted phone showed updates from Bernard confirming the foundation announcement preparations, and from Joanne Winters advising that criminal complaint documentation was finalized and awaiting my final approval. The standard phone showed 3 missed calls from Caroline and a text message. Tyler called again. Sounds desperate. Please contact me ASAP. As I was considering my response, another message appeared. This one from a number I didn't recognize. Dad, we need to talk. This has gone too far. Please call me before you do something we'll both regret. Tyler had apparently acquired a new phone, likely after his previous accounts had been flagged for fraudulent activity. The tone of his message was simultaneously demanding and pleading, without a hint of genuine remorse for his actions. I saved the number but chose not to respond immediately. The afternoon brought an unexpected distraction when my advanced placement. Students presented their quarterly projects analyzing different investment strategies across market cycles. I watched with melancholy amusement as 18-year-old Jennifer Wong enthusiastically explained the power of compound interest and long-term value investing, principles I had applied decades ago to build my own portfolio. Mr. Harrison, she concluded confidently, my analysis shows that patience and consistency almost always outperform attempting to time market fluctuations or chase trending investments. Small, regular investments compound dramatically over decades, if left undisturbed. Excellent insight, Jennifer, I praised, acutely aware of the irony. Time in the market typically beats timing the market. What might that suggest about get-rich-quick schemes or promises of extraordinary short-term returns? They're statistically improbable at best, she replied promptly, and often signs of potential fraud. Legitimate wealth building is usually gradual and methodical. The lesson my own son had failed to grasp despite years of direct and indirect teaching. After the final bell, I remained in my classroom grading assignments until most colleagues had departed. The school hallways emptied gradually, the building settling into late afternoon quiet as I finally packed my materials and headed toward the parking lot. Detective Collins was waiting beside my Toyota, his posture casual, but his presence unmistakably official. He straightened as I approached. "Mr. Harrison, sorry to ambush you at work. Do you have a moment?" "Of course," I replied, unlocking the car and gesturing to the passenger seat as I settled behind the wheel. The parking lot offered sufficient privacy while avoiding the appearance of an official police interaction that might generate unhelpful speculation among any remaining staff. "We've located your son," Collins began without preamble. He checked into the Golden Palace in Atlantic City yesterday evening and attempted to secure a $50,000 line of credit using your personal information. A familiar disappointment settled in my chest. Was he successful? No. The casino's compliance department flagged the attempt due to the credit freeze you've implemented. He apparently became quite agitated when denied. The detective consulted his notes. Subsequently, he was recorded losing approximately $8,000 in cash at various gaming tables, before being escorted from the premises for disruptive behavior around 3 a.m. Each detail reinforced the painful reality of Tyler's self-destructive choices. "Have you taken him into custody?" "That's why I wanted to speak with you directly," Collins replied. "We tracked him to a hotel in Philadelphia this morning. When officers arrived, they found him in considerable distress. He was transported to University Hospital for evaluation." Alarm replaced disappointment. Evaluation? Was he injured? "Not physically," Collins clarified carefully. The responding officers determined he was experiencing an acute psychological episode. The medical staff has placed him on a 72-hour psychiatric hold for assessment and stabilization. The news hit with unexpected force. Despite my anger and disappointment, the thought of Tyler in psychiatric distress awakened powerful parental concern. "I see," I managed, processing this development. Are visitors permitted?" "Limited visitation is allowed, though the attending psychiatrist has final approval. I can provide the hospital details if you wish to contact them." "Please," I said, accepting the information sheet he offered. "Has he been formally charged yet?" Collins shook his head. "Given these developments, the DA is awaiting the psychiatric evaluation before determining how to proceed. The evidence supports charges of fraud and identity theft, but his mental state at the time of the offenses may become a factor." After providing additional details and confirming my continued willingness to cooperate with the investigation, Collins departed, leaving me alone in the nearly empty parking lot, contemplating this unexpected turn of events. The drive to Philadelphia took just under 2 hours, providing ample time to process my conflicting emotions. Anger at Tyler's betrayal still simmered beneath genuine concern for his welfare. The psychiatric hold suggested a level of crisis that transcended our immediate conflict, potentially pointing to deeper issues I had perhaps missed or minimized over the years. University Hospital's psychiatric wing operated under strict security protocols. After confirming my identity and relationship to Tyler, I was directed to a consultation with Dr. Andrea Harding, the attending psychiatrist, before any potential visitation would be authorized. Dr. Harding was a composed woman in her 50s who invited me into a small but comfortable consultation room. Her clinical gaze was assessing but not unkind as she introduced herself. "Mr. Harrison, I appreciate you coming. Before discussing visitation, I'd like to share some context about your son's current condition, with his permission. Of course, I agreed, noting the ethical protocol that required patient consent even for family discussions. Tyler was admitted exhibiting symptoms of acute anxiety, paranoia, and delusional thinking. Initial toxicology showed evidence of cocaine and prescription stimulant abuse, which may be exacerbating these symptoms but likely aren't their primary cause. The information was both shocking and sadly clarifying. Drug abuse would explain the escalating recklessness of Tyler's behavior, his increasingly desperate financial maneuvers, and perhaps even his susceptibility to Alyssa's manipulations. In our initial assessment, Dr. Harding continued, he expressed several consistent themes: a pervasive sense of inadequacy, obsessive comparison to perceived successful peers, and a desperate need to achieve financial success through increasingly high-risk ventures. Her description painfully aligned with behaviors I'd observed, but had attributed to immaturity rather than potential psychological distress. He's currently stabilizing with appropriate medication and will begin structured therapy tomorrow. The mandatory hold is primarily to ensure his safety while we conduct a comprehensive evaluation. I appreciate your thoroughness, I said sincerely. Is visitation advisable at this stage? Dr. Harding considered the question thoughtfully. Tyler has expressed willingness to see you, which we consider positive. However, I should prepare you. His perception of recent events may differ significantly from reality due to his current condition. Confrontational interactions could be counterproductive to his stabilization. I understand, I assured her. My concern is for his well-being, not revisiting our conflict. She studied me briefly, apparently satisfied with my response. In that case, a short visit may be beneficial, 20 minutes maximum, and staff will remain nearby should any issues arise. The psychiatric unit was secured by double doors and staffed by attentive nurses who monitored the common area where several patients engaged in quiet activities. Tyler was seated alone by a window, staring out at the hospital grounds. Even from a distance, I could see that he appeared disheveled, his usual meticulous appearance notably absent. He turned as a staff member indicated my arrival, his expression cycling through surprise, wariness, and finally a kind of resigned recognition. As I approached, the physical signs of his distress became more apparent. Weight loss, dark circles beneath bloodshot eyes, a nervous tension in his movements. Dad, he acknowledged as I took the seat across from him. Came to see the aftermath of your handiwork? The accusatory tone might once have provoked defensiveness. Now, understanding it as potentially symptomatic of his condition, I responded with measured calm. I came because I'm concerned about you, Tyler. He laughed sharply, drawing brief glances from the monitoring staff. Concerned, right. Concerned enough to have me arrested and thrown in the psych ward. I didn't have you arrested, I corrected gently. You committed a crime, and there are natural legal consequences to that choice. As for this facility, the doctors are trying to help you through what appears to be a difficult time. A difficult time, he echoed mockingly. That's one way to describe watching your life implode because your own father values money over family. I took a measured breath, reminding myself of Dr. Harding's caution about confrontation. Tyler, I understand you're angry and hurt, but I'm here because despite everything that's happened, you're my son, and I care about your well-being. Something in my tone seemed to penetrate his defensive posture. He studied me with sudden intensity, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. In our interaction, they say I'm having some kind of breakdown, he said, his voice losing its aggressive edge. That cocaine and Adderall messed with my head, made me paranoid, made me think things that weren't real. The doctors mentioned substance issues, I acknowledged, maintaining a non-judgmental tone. How long has that been happening? He shrugged, gaze dropping to his hands. 6, maybe 8 months. After the business collapsed, It was just occasional at first, to keep going, to have energy to find the next opportunity. Then Alyssa had better connections, better stuff. The timeline aligned with the escalating financial desperation I'd observed. And Alyssa? Where is she now? Gone, he said flatly. Ghosted me once the money ran out. Big surprise, right? Another person who saw me as nothing but a resource to exploit. The bitter, self-pity in his voice suggested a complex mixture of awareness and denial about his own similar treatment of others, including me. Dr. Harding mentioned you'll be starting therapy tomorrow, I said, shifting to more constructive ground. That sounds like a positive step. Tyler's expression darkened again. Because I'm crazy, right? Easier to believe I'm insane than to admit you've been a controlling, withholding father my entire life. No one is calling you crazy, I corrected firmly. But it sounds like you've been struggling with substances and perhaps some underlying issues that deserve professional support. What I needed was a father who believed in me, he countered, emotion breaking through his affected indifference. Who would invest in my potential instead of hoarding every penny of his precious retirement fund? Do you have any idea what it's like being the son of the most risk-averse man in America? Always saving, always cautious, always saying no to any opportunity that wasn't guaranteed? The irony of his perception struck me anew. My actual investment portfolio was remarkably diversified and included numerous high-risk, high-reward positions that had contributed substantially to my wealth. The difference wasn't risk tolerance but methodical analysis versus impulsive speculation. I understand you see me that way, I acknowledged, choosing not to defend or explain myself in this moment. Right now, though, the priority is your health and stability. The rest, including the legal situation, can be addressed when you're stronger. A nurse approached, signaling that our time was nearly up. Tyler noticed and straightened, a sudden urgency in his demeanor. I need you to drop the charges, Dad, he said, leaning forward intently. Once I get out of here, I can start fresh. I have ideas, connections. I just need another chance without a criminal record hanging over me. The familiar pattern, always another chance, another opportunity, another fresh start without accountability, for the previous failures. Yet now I understood these weren't merely character flaws, but potentially symptoms of deeper psychological struggles. Tyler, I can't simply make the legal consequences disappear, I explained gently. What I can do is support your treatment process and work with your legal representation to ensure your health issues are properly considered. Disappointment and resentment flashed across his features, but before he could respond, the nurse indicated our time had concluded. As I stood to leave, Tyler spoke again, his voice quieter. You still don't get it, do you? You think your precious rules and consequences are going to fix me? They never have before. The observation lingered with me as I was escorted from the unit, through the security doors, and back to the main hospital lobby. There was a painful truth in his words, regardless of the distorted thinking that surrounded them. Consequences alone had indeed never created lasting change in Tyler's behavior patterns. As I walked to my car in the hospital parking garage, my encrypted phone buzzed with a message from Bernard. Foundation press release finalized. Legal team awaits your approval to proceed with Phase 2 implementation. I paused, gazing at the message while processing the stark contrast between the two worlds I inhabited. The controlled, strategic financial realm, where decisions unfolded according to carefully structured plans, and the messy, painful emotional landscape of family, relationships where control was largely illusion. The juxtaposition clarified something important. Phase 2 needed modification. The foundation announcement would proceed as planned, but the broader revelation of my financial position required a more nuanced approach, particularly given Tyler's current vulnerability. I typed a response to Bernard. Proceed with foundation. Announcement as scheduled. Delay full Phase 2 implementation pending further instruction. Family situation developing. As I drove away from the hospital, I found myself reflecting on a fundamental question that had surfaced repeatedly throughout this crisis. Had my decision to separate my financial reality from my family life been wisdom or a significant misjudgment? The answer, I was beginning to realize, wasn't simply one or the other. Like most meaningful life choices, it contained elements of both. The official announcement of the Harrison Educational Foundation made the front page of the local newspaper 3 days later. The headline, "Westridge Teacher Establishes $27 million Educational Foundation," was accompanied by a photograph taken years earlier at a school awards ceremony. In it, I stood smiling beside a group of students who had won a state economics competition, looking every bit the dedicated but ordinary teacher I had presented myself as for decades. The article detailed the Foundation's mission to support educational excellence through teacher development programs, student scholarships, and innovative curriculum initiatives. It mentioned my 37 years of teaching and quoted several former students who had gone on to successful careers in business and finance, crediting my influence on their professional trajectories. Only in the final paragraphs did the reporter touch on the question everyone was asking. Where had a public school teacher obtained $27 million? The article delicately referenced successful private investments maintained separate from his teaching career, and noted that I had declined to elaborate further, emphasizing that the Foundation's work should be the focus rather than its founder's personal finances. By mid-morning, the news had spread throughout Westridge High School. The atmosphere in the hallways as I moved between classes was noticeably different. Conversations pausing as I passed, students whispering behind cupped hands, colleagues offering congratulations tinged with obvious curiosity. Principal Martinez had graciously sent a brief, factual email to staff confirming the Foundation announcement and requesting respect for my privacy. But the natural human response to such revelations was unavoidable. In the faculty lounge during my planning period, several colleagues approached with genuine warmth. "Richard, this is extraordinary," said Diane Wilson, who had taught English at Westridge for nearly as long as I had taught economics. Though, I confess I'm having trouble reconciling the man who borrowed lunch money last semester with someone who could fund an entire foundation. I smiled at the memory. I had indeed forgotten my wallet occasionally, maintaining the persona of a teacher living carefully on his salary. The Foundation represents many years of disciplined investment, Diane. The borrowing was perhaps unnecessary habit. Michael Chen, the physics teacher, shook his head in amazement. All those times you drove that ancient Toyota to our department, meetings, or stayed in budget motels during academic competitions. Was that all just for appearance? No, I replied honestly. It reflects my actual values. Wealth doesn't need to change how you choose to live. The conversations remained, respectful but probing throughout the day. I answered questions selectively, neither offering comprehensive explanations nor being dishonest. The full truth, that I had accumulated over $40 million through meticulous global investments while deliberately maintaining the appearance of modest means, seemed unnecessary and potentially disruptive to share in its entirety. By afternoon, national financial publications had picked up the story, speculating more directly about the source of my wealth. One online article had even connected some dots, noting my summer travels to financial centers and questioning whether the humble teacher persona had been a calculated cover for more substantial business activities. As the final bell rang, I gathered my materials and headed toward the parking lot, where I found an unfamiliar luxury sedan parked beside my Toyota. A well-dressed woman emerged as I approached. "Mr. Harrison, Jessica Williams, Financial Insights." "Magazine, I was hoping for a few minutes of your time." The first reporter to track me down directly, though surely not the last. "I appreciate your interest, Ms. Williams, but I have nothing to add beyond what's in the Foundation press release." "With respect, sir, there's considerably more to this story," she persisted. Our research indicates connections between your name and several significant investment positions over the past 2 decades. Your summers in Geneva, Singapore, Hong Kong, these weren't typical teacher conferences, were they? Her information was surprisingly accurate, suggesting substantial investigative work. I maintained a pleasant but non-committal expression. The foundation announcement stands on its own, Ms. Williams, if you'll excuse me. As I moved to enter my car, she made one final attempt. Mr. Harrison, people are fascinated by your story. The teacher with a secret fortune is inherently compelling. Wouldn't you rather shape that narrative than leave it to speculation? Her point wasn't without merit. The story was unfolding with or without my participation. However, my priorities remained clear: Tyler's treatment, the foundation's launch, and maintaining whatever normalcy was possible during my final semester of teaching. Perhaps at some point, I conceded. For now, the work of the foundation takes precedence over personal narratives. That evening, I received an update from Dr. Harding regarding Tyler's condition. The mandatory psychiatric hold had been extended by an additional 72 hours based on continuing concerns about his stability and potential self-harm risk. While the substance-induced symptoms were diminishing with medical intervention, the underlying psychological issues, described clinically as elements of narcissistic personality structure combined with severe anxiety and possible bipolar features, required more comprehensive evaluation and treatment. We're recommending a 30-day inpatient program following the acute stabilization period, Dr. Harding explained during our phone conversation. Tyler has been resistant to this suggestion so far, but we believe it represents his best opportunity for meaningful recovery. I support whatever treatment you believe will help him, I assured her. Regarding the financial aspects, that's actually why I'm calling, she interjected gently. Tyler has been quite vocal about his inability to afford such treatment, citing the legal issues and frozen accounts. He's mentioned repeatedly that his only option would be if you are willing to cover the costs, which he believes you won't do because you're teaching him a lesson. The familiar manipulation was recognizable even through the lens of genuine psychiatric distress. Tyler had always excelled at positioning himself as the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of his own difficulties. The treatment costs aren't an issue, I assured her. I'll make arrangements directly with your billing department. However, I'd prefer Tyler not be informed of this immediately. His focus should be on engaging with treatment, not on financial calculations. After concluding the call with Dr. Harding, I contacted Bernard to initiate the necessary financial arrangements for Tyler's treatment program. The costs, approximately $68,000 for the recommended inpatient stay and follow-up care, represented a negligible expenditure from my resources, but would have been catastrophic for the modest income teacher Tyler believed me to be. Bernard, I asked after completing the treatment authorization, has there been any update on the Ferrari dealership matter? Yes, he confirmed. Their legal department has agreed to withdraw potential charges in exchange for full restitution and a signed acknowledgement of the attempted fraud. The payment has been processed from your contingency account. This represented another $43,000 quietly resolved without Tyler's knowledge, preventing additional legal complications that would have compounded his already precarious situation. Similar arrangements had been made with Bergdorf Goodman and other merchants affected by the unauthorized spending spree. And the district attorney's position? Ms. Winters has been in discussions with their office, Bernard replied, referring to my longtime legal counsel. Given the documented psychiatric issues and your family relationship to the defendant, they're considering a deferred prosecution agreement contingent on completion of the treatment program and full restitution. Each of these interventions was carefully structured to require appropriate accountability from Tyler while preventing the complete destruction of his future prospects. The balance was delicate, consequences significant enough to inspire genuine reflection and change, but not so devastating as to eliminate the possibility of redemption. As I ended my call with Bernard, I noticed several missed calls from Caroline and a text message indicating she had seen the foundation announcement and needed to speak with me urgently. The gradual unraveling of my carefully separated lives was expanding to include family members who had known only the teacher version of Richard Harrison. Caroline answered immediately when I called back, her voice vibrating with a mixture of confusion and indignation. $27 million, Richard? A foundation? What exactly haven't you been telling us all these years? The question was entirely reasonable. While never close enough to share household finances, Caroline and I had maintained a warm sibling relationship throughout adulthood. She had helped with Tyler during his early years after my wife's death, had attended his school events when my teaching schedule created conflicts, had been a consistent, supportive presence in both our lives, and I had never given her the slightest indication that I possessed wealth beyond my teacher's salary. It's a long and somewhat complex story, Caroline, I began, settling into my study chair. One that probably should have been shared years ago. You think? She replied, the hurt evident beneath her sarcasm. All those times you talked about careful budgeting for retirement, or mentioned being worried about college costs for Tyler. Was that all some kind of act? Not an act, I corrected gently. A choice about how to live and raise my son, regardless of financial capability. The foundation represents investment returns accumulated over many decades, managed separately from my daily life. But why the secrecy? Why let your family believe you were just getting by when you were apparently some kind of financial genius? It was the central question that kept resurfacing throughout this unfolding revelation. Why maintain such rigorous separation between my financial reality and personal relationships? The answer had seemed so clear for decades, but explaining it to others proved challenging. I wanted Tyler to develop values independent of wealth or privilege, I began. Though even as I spoke, I recognized the inadequacy of this explanation. I wanted my relationships, professional and personal, to be based on who I am, not what I possess. And over time, the separation became its own kind of habit, difficult to break without seeming like I'd been deliberately deceptive. Because you had been deliberately deceptive, Caroline pointed out, not unkindly. Richard, no one would have expected you to flash money around or spoil Tyler rotten, but there's a considerable difference between living modestly by choice and letting your family believe you were financially constrained. Her perspective contained undeniable truth. What had begun as a principled decision about child-rearing and authentic relationship building had evolved over decades into something more complicated, a dual identity maintained through active concealment, rather than mere discretion. You're right, I acknowledged. The distinction became blurred over time, and the longer it continued, the more difficult it seemed to correct. I can only say I believed I was acting in Tyler's best interest, whether that belief was correct or misguided. And now? Caroline asked, her tone softening slightly. With Tyler in psychiatric care and this foundation making headlines, what happens next? It was the question I had been contemplating since discovering Tyler's betrayal and subsequent breakdown. What redemptive path might emerge from this painful convergence of hidden truths and public revelations? I'm trying to determine that, I admitted. The foundation will continue regardless. Its mission is important and independent of these personal matters. For Tyler, I'm ensuring he receives the treatment he needs while maintaining appropriate consequences for his actions. Beyond that, I'm still navigating this new landscape where my separate worlds have collided. After my conversation with Caroline, I spent the evening reviewing foundation documents and responding to emails from Bernard regarding various financial positions requiring attention. The markets continued their indifferent movements regardless of personal crises, and certain responsibilities couldn't be neglected even during emotional turmoil. Around 9 o'clock, my regular phone displayed an incoming call from University Hospital. unusual timing that triggered immediate concern. Dr. Harding's voice greeted me, her professional tone carrying a note of cautious optimism. "Mr. Harrison, I'm calling with what I consider positive news. Tyler has agreed to the inpatient treatment program following a breakthrough session this evening." "That is good news," I agreed, genuinely relieved. What changed his perspective? "Several factors converged," she explained. "The medication adjustments have helped stabilize his most acute symptoms, allowing for more productive therapy sessions. But the catalyst appears to have been learning about the foundation announcement from another patient who saw the news. I hadn't anticipated this development. How did he respond to that information?" "Initially with disbelief and anger," she acknowledged. "He accused the other patient of lying, then insisted it must be some kind of elaborate deception on your part. Once we confirmed the foundation's existence, he experienced what we might call a perspective shift." "Meaning?" In his own words, which I'm sharing with his permission, he said, "So all this time I've been chasing get-rich-quick schemes while my father quietly built a multi-million-dollar foundation? What does that say about everything I thought I knew?" The question revealed a level of self-reflection I hadn't observed in Tyler for years. Whether stemming from genuine insight or simply the shock of discovering his assumptions about me had been fundamentally flawed, it represented a potential opening for meaningful change. "He's requested another meeting with you," Dr. Harding continued. "Perhaps tomorrow if your schedule permits. He specifically mentioned wanting to understand your actual financial story before committing fully to the treatment program." Though wary of potential manipulation, Tyler had proven adept at using apparent vulnerability to achieve specific goals. The request seemed reasonable given the circumstances. "I'll come tomorrow afternoon," I agreed. "Please let him know." The following morning brought an unexpected visitor to my classroom during first period. Detective Collins stood quietly at the back of the room while I conducted a lesson on market externalities, waiting until students had departed for their next class before approaching. "Mr. Harrison?" He greeted me with a professional nod. "Sorry to interrupt your teaching day again." "Not at all, Detective. I assume this is about Tyler?" "Partially," he confirmed, setting his notebook on my desk. "The DA's office has reviewed the psychiatric reports and is inclined toward the deferred prosecution arrangement your attorney proposed. There would be conditions: completion of the treatment program, restitution, community service, and a probationary period with financial monitoring." The terms were reasonable, balancing accountability with recognition of the mental health factors involved. "That sounds appropriate," I agreed. "And the partial aspect?" Collins hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. "The investigation into your son's activities led to some unexpected connections. The woman involved, Alyssa Crawford, has an extensive history of similar schemes targeting vulnerable individuals with addiction issues. She's currently under investigation in 3 other jurisdictions." This wasn't entirely surprising given her calculated exploitation of Tyler's vulnerabilities, but the broader criminal pattern suggested something more organized than a simple opportunistic theft. "Furthermore," Collins continued, "Ms. Crawford appears connected to a network that specializes in identity theft and financial fraud. Your son's case initially appeared to be a straightforward family fraud situation, but it's potentially linked to a much larger operation we've been tracking." "I see," I replied, processing this information. "How does this affect Tyler's situation?" "He's willing to cooperate, provide information about Crawford's methods, contacts, and activities. It could significantly strengthen his deferred prosecution agreement. The DA is particularly interested given your unexpected financial position." The implication was clear. The foundation announcement had altered the perceived significance of the case, transforming it from a sad but routine family fraud into something potentially more newsworthy: a wealthy philanthropist targeted through his son by an organized criminal network. "Detective, my financial position shouldn't influence the legal handling of this matter." I stated firmly. Tyler's actions and subsequent psychiatric issues should be evaluated on their merits, regardless of my ability to absorb the financial impact. Collins nodded, acknowledging the principle while remaining pragmatic. I understand and respect that position, Mr. Harrison. But realistically, the public dimension changes things. Your foundation announcement creates a narrative that will inevitably affect how this case is perceived and processed. He wasn't wrong. The story had evolved beyond my control once the foundation became public knowledge. The quiet teacher with a secret fortune made for compelling headlines, and his troubled son's exploitation by financial predators added another layer of public interest. I'll discuss the cooperation option with Tyler during my visit today, I agreed, though his decision should be guided by what best supports his recovery, not by what might create a more advantageous legal outcome. After Detective Collins departed, I completed my teaching responsibilities for the day with the focused professionalism that had characterized my classroom approach for decades. Despite the tumultuous circumstances of my personal life, the commitment to educational excellence remained unwavering, perhaps the most authentic constant across my seemingly contradictory identities. The drive to University Hospital that afternoon gave me time to consider what aspects of my financial journey I was willing to share with Tyler. The complete story spanned nearly 4 decades and involved complex international transactions, strategic relationships with financial institutions across 3 continents, and investment decisions that had proven remarkably prescient through multiple market cycles. But the technical details weren't what Tyler needed. He required something more fundamental, an understanding of the principles and choices that had guided my financial decisions, while remaining completely separate from how I presented myself to the world, including to my own son. The psychiatric unit seemed calmer than during my previous visit. Tyler was waiting in a small private consultation room rather than the common area, suggesting his status had been adjusted based on improved stability. His appearance showed subtle improvements: clearer eyes, less agitation in his movements, a more present quality to his attention as I entered. "Dad," he greeted me, his tone cautious but not immediately hostile. "Thanks for coming." "Of course," I replied, taking the seat across from him. "Dr. Harding mentioned you've agreed to the inpatient program. That's a positive step." He nodded, studying me with an intensity that felt different from our previous interactions, more assessing than accusatory. $27 million, he said finally. A foundation, while driving a 15-year-old Toyota and clipping grocery coupons. The foundation represents accumulated investment returns, I explained. The Toyota and coupons represent choices about what I value and how I choose to live. "But why?" he pressed, genuine confusion evident in his expression. "Why live like you're barely getting by when you're actually—" "What? A secret millionaire?" It was the central question everyone kept asking, one that had seemed so clear to me for decades but apparently appeared baffling to others. I considered how to frame my response in terms Tyler might understand, given his own experiences and perspective. "When your mother died," I began carefully, referencing the loss that had occurred when Tyler was just 4 years old. I had already established certain investment positions that were performing well. Her life insurance provided additional capital at a time when global markets offered exceptional opportunities. Tyler listened with unusual attentiveness as I continued. I faced a fundamental choice: use that growing wealth to change our lifestyle dramatically, or maintain the purposeful, education-centered life we had planned together while directing the financial returns toward long-term goals. "But even as those investments grew, you never changed anything," Tyler observed. "You kept teaching for teachers' wages, kept living in the same house, kept acting like money was always tight." "Not acting," I corrected gently. "Choosing. There's a difference between financial capability and consumption choices. One can have abundant resources while still making deliberate decisions about what constitutes enough. Something in this framing seemed to resonate with him. Enough, he repeated thoughtfully. I don't think I've ever felt like anything was enough. There was always something more, something better, something that would finally prove I was successful. The insight surprised me with its clarity. Perhaps the psychiatric treatment was indeed creating space for genuine self-reflection. The foundation, he continued, that was always the plan? To use the money for education? It evolved over time, I explained. Initially, I simply wanted to preserve options while raising you with values independent of wealth. As the portfolio grew beyond any reasonable personal needs, the foundation concept developed as a meaningful legacy aligned with my life's work. Tyler absorbed this, his expression cycling through complex emotions I couldn't fully interpret. All those times I came to you with business ideas, investment opportunities, you could have funded any of them without blinking. Instead, you gave me lectures about business plans and sustainable models. Yes, I acknowledged. Because writing a check isn't actually helping Tyler. It's substituting money for the more valuable resources of skill development, judgment, and resilience. He laughed suddenly, a sound containing equal parts bitterness and genuine amusement. Meanwhile, I was breaking into your retirement account, stealing what I thought was every penny you had for your future security, all to impress a woman who was playing me from the beginning. The irony is almost too perfect. The self-awareness in this observation, however painfully acquired, represented significant progress from the entitled defensiveness of our previous encounter. Detective Collins visited me today, I said, shifting to the immediate practical matters at hand. The district attorney is considering a deferred prosecution arrangement given your mental health situation and willingness to pursue treatment. Hope flickered in Tyler's expression. So the charges could be dropped? Potentially suspended, contingent on completing treatment and meeting other conditions including restitution and community service, I clarified, not wanting to oversimplify the accountability aspects. They're also interested in your cooperation regarding Alyssa Crawford and her associates. Apparently, she's connected to a larger fraud network they've been investigating. Of course she is, Tyler said, shaking his head with resigned recognition. Nothing about her was real, was it? Just another calculated scheme targeting the desperate and gullible. You weren't the first person she's manipulated, I confirmed. Detective Collins indicated cases across multiple jurisdictions with similar patterns. Tyler was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. I'll cooperate, he said finally. Not for the legal benefits, though I won't pretend those don't matter, but because I need to understand exactly how I let myself become so completely deceived by her, by the drugs, by my own desperation to be something I wasn't. The statement contained more genuine accountability than I'd heard from him in years, possibly ever. Whether this represented a temporary insight facilitated by medication and therapy, or the beginning of more substantive change, remained to be seen. But it offered a foundation for cautious hope. There's something else I need to ask, Tyler continued, his tone shifting to something more vulnerable. The treatment program, it's expensive. Way beyond what I could possibly afford now. Dr. Harding said it's been arranged but wouldn't explain how. Are you? The treatment costs are covered, I confirmed simply. Your focus should be on engaging fully with the recovery process, not on financial concerns. Tears unexpectedly filled his eyes, the first genuine emotional display I'd witnessed from him since childhood that wasn't rooted in anger or manipulation. After what I did, stealing what I thought was everything you had, you're still willing to help me? The question revealed the core misconception that had perhaps guided many of Tyler's actions over the years, the belief that love and support were conditional, transactional, dependent on performance and success rather than rooted in the unchangeable reality of our relationship. Tyler, I said quietly, you're my son. That fact doesn't change based on your actions or choices, whether wise or profoundly misguided. Holding you accountable isn't the opposite of supporting you. It's part of the same commitment. As our meeting concluded and I prepared to leave, Tyler asked one final question that suggested a depth of reflection I hadn't anticipated from this encounter. Dad, he said hesitantly, all those years of living modestly while secretly building millions. Were you happy? The question was striking in its simplicity and profound in its implications. Not was I successful, or was I smart, but was I happy, suggesting a recognition that these qualities might not be as interconnected as he had previously assumed. Yes, I answered truthfully. Teaching students who genuinely wanted to learn, watching concepts click into place, seeing former students succeed in applying those principles, that work brought me authentic fulfillment regardless of compensation. The financial success was separate, satisfying in its own way, but not the source of daily meaning. He nodded slowly, seeming to truly consider this perspective perhaps for the first time. I don't think I've ever been happy, he admitted quietly. Not really. Always chasing the next thing, the bigger success, the more impressive achievement. Never actually being present in what I already had. As I left the hospital and drove back toward my modest home in the fading afternoon light, Tyler's question continued resonating. The happiness I had found in teaching, in quiet private accomplishment, in building something meaningful through patient, consistent effort over decades, these were the true fruits of my dual life, far more valuable than the financial assets that had captured headlines. The foundation announcement had inadvertently created public interest in the wrong aspect of my story. The millions were mere numbers, the result of compound returns and fortunate timing in market cycles. The meaningful accomplishment wasn't the wealth itself, but the choices made about its purpose, its limitations, and its proper place in a well-lived life. Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. The campus of Westridge High School bloomed with dogwoods and cherry blossoms as I cleared out the classroom that had been my professional home for 37 years. Carefully boxing teaching materials, student projects, and academic awards accumulated over decades, I found myself reflecting not on what I was leaving behind, but on the foundation being built from this legacy. My retirement had become official, at the semester's end, earlier than originally planned, but with enough time for a thoughtful transition. Principal Martinez had organized a modest farewell gathering at my insistence. Nothing elaborate, just colleagues and a few former students, sharing memories over coffee and cake in the faculty lounge. I still can't believe we're losing you, Diane Wilson said, helping me pack a collection of economics textbooks I was donating to the department. Though I suppose running a multi-million-dollar foundation is a worthwhile second act. The classroom will always be where the most important work happens, I replied, meaning it sincerely. The foundation simply expands the reach of that work. The Harrison Educational Foundation had moved from announcement to active operation with remarkable efficiency, thanks to the groundwork laid over previous years. The board had approved its first round of teacher development grants, established a scholarship program for promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds, and initiated a curriculum innovation fund that would support creative educational approaches throughout the district. My office at the foundation headquarters, a modest suite in a converted historic building downtown, contained a wall of photographs from my teaching career. Students from across the decades smiled from these images, many now successful professionals who had written touching messages when they learned of my retirement and the foundation's establishment. Your economics class taught me more than supply and demand curves, wrote Michael Tanner, now a sustainable energy entrepreneur. You showed me that patient, ethical building creates more lasting value than flashy, quick wins. I've applied that principle throughout my career. These testimonials meant more than any financial achievement. They represented the true return on investment from a life devoted to education, the ripple effects of knowledge, values, and perspectives shared with generation after generation of young minds. 3 months had passed since Tyler entered the residential treatment program. The structured environment, comprehensive therapy, and continued medication management had created space for substantive self-examination and gradual healing. Our weekly meetings showed steady progress, not miraculous transformation, but consistent steps toward greater self-awareness and responsibility. The psychiatrist says I'm showing classic recovery patterns, Tyler had explained during my most recent visit. First, the pink cloud phase where everything seems suddenly clear and fixable, then the crash into reality when you realize how much damage you've done and how much work lies ahead. "And where are you now?" I had asked, noting the new steadiness in his demeanor. "Somewhere in the middle," he'd answered thoughtfully. "Some days I feel genuine hope, like I'm finally seeing things clearly. Other days the shame is overwhelming, and I can't believe how completely I deceived myself. About Alyssa, about the drugs, about what success actually means." The treatment program had 2 weeks remaining, though the therapeutic team had recommended ongoing outpatient support following discharge. Tyler's cooperation with authorities regarding Alyssa Crawford and her associates had progressed as promised, providing valuable information that supported several pending fraud cases. In exchange, the district attorney had formalized the deferred prosecution agreement, establishing a 2-year probationary period during which Tyler would need to maintain mental health treatment, perform community service, and remain free of substances. Successfully completing these requirements would result in the charges being dismissed, a significant opportunity for rehabilitation rather than mere punishment. The Foundation's downtown office provided a comfortable setting for a different kind of meeting that spring morning, one I had been considering for several weeks as Tyler's discharge date approached. Bernard arrived precisely on time as always, neatly dressed and carrying his customary portfolio of documents requiring attention. "Richard," he greeted me warmly. "The Singapore position has stabilized as predicted. The quarterly reports show growth exceeding our projections by approximately 38%. We spent 30 minutes reviewing various investment positions, making strategic adjustments, and authorizing transactions across several markets. These financial responsibilities remained a significant aspect of my daily activities, now conducted openly rather than carefully separated from my public identity. As we concluded the regular business, I raised the matter that had prompted this in-person meeting rather than our usual secure video conference. "Bernard, I've been considering a structured approach to helping Tyler rebuild his life after treatment without enabling the problems that contributed to his breakdown." My trusted advisor nodded, having anticipated this conversation. "You're thinking about a controlled introduction to your actual financial position and potentially some form of structured access to resources." "Precisely," I confirmed. "Not an inheritance or trust fund in the traditional sense, but something that might provide appropriate opportunity while maintaining necessary boundaries." Bernard removed a document from his portfolio. "I've taken the liberty of drafting several potential approaches based on similar situations I've managed for other clients. The key variables involve degree of oversight, access restrictions, purpose, limitations, and milestone requirements." His efficiency reflected decades of trusted service, always anticipating needs while respecting boundaries. We spent the next hour reviewing various options, eventually settling on a framework that balanced opportunity with accountability. "The Educational Achievement Fund," Bernard summarized, making final notes. "A restricted purpose account initially, funded at $150,000. Accessible specifically for educational and legitimate business development purposes, subject to professional evaluation of proposed uses. Additional funds released based on demonstrated responsibility and achievement of specific milestones. With quarterly reviews and the requirement that Tyler maintain ongoing therapeutic support, I added, emphasizing the mental health component. And complete transparency regarding the foundation's assets and your personal financial position, Bernard concluded. No more secrets or separate worlds. The approach felt right, neither abandoning Tyler to the consequences of his actions without support, nor shielding him from the necessary growth that comes from facing those consequences directly. It offered a pathway forward based on demonstrated responsibility rather than entitlement, while acknowledging the reality that family support could be both meaningful and appropriate when properly structured. We'll present this when he completes the treatment program, I decided. Not as a reward for finishing treatment, but as a framework for rebuilding based on different principles than those that led to his collapse. Bernard nodded approval. A thoughtful approach. And for yourself? Have you considered how you wish to live now that the separation between your professional and financial identities has dissolved? The question touched on something I'd been contemplating throughout this transition period. For decades, my lifestyle choices had been partly philosophical and partly strategic, living modestly both from genuine preference and to maintain the separation between my teaching and investing lives. With that separation now dissolved, what choices would authentically reflect my values rather than merely maintaining a constructed identity? I'm making some changes, I acknowledged. Not dramatic transformations, but thoughtful adjustments that feel consistent with who I am, rather than who I was pretending to be. The most visible change had been trading my 15-year-old Toyota for a new hybrid vehicle, not a flashy luxury model, but a practical, environmentally responsible car that reflected both quality and conscientious consumption. I had also hired a part-time assistant to help manage foundation matters, allowing me to focus on strategic direction rather than administrative details. The house remains perfect for my needs, I continued, though I've finally undertaken those kitchen renovations I've been considering for years. Bernard smiled at this small concession to comfort after decades of unnecessary frugality. Finding the balance between unnecessary consumption and appropriate enjoyment of resources is itself a form of wisdom, he observed, particularly when those resources can simultaneously support meaningful work through the foundation. As we concluded our meeting, my phone displayed a message from Tyler's treatment center. Family session scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Tyler has requested discussion of post-discharge planning. The timing seemed serendipitous given our just completed planning. I confirmed the appointment and spent the remainder of the afternoon reviewing scholarship applications for the Foundation's first award cycle. The stories of ambitious, determined students facing financial barriers to education reminded me powerfully of why this work mattered more than any personal financial achievement. That evening, as I prepared dinner in my modestly renovated kitchen, Carolyn called to check in, a more frequent occurrence since the Foundation announcement had prompted re-examination of our family relationships. "How's the retirement treating you?" she asked after we'd exchanged pleasantries. "Bored yet without teenagers to enlighten about economic principles?" "Hardly," I chuckled. "The Foundation keeps me thoroughly engaged, just with different challenges than classroom management." "And they're letting you keep your millions instead of trying to spend them all at once? Remarkable restraint for a nonprofit." Her teasing reflected the gradual healing in our relationship following her initial hurt about my decades of financial secrecy. We had worked through those feelings in several honest conversations, reaching a new understanding that acknowledged both my misguided intentions and the genuine pain caused by such significant omissions. "The endowment structure ensures responsible stewardship," I explained, playing along with her banter. "Though I'm discovering that giving money away effectively is considerably more complex than accumulating it." "Speaking of money," Caroline said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "I visited Tyler yesterday. He mentioned you might be helping him with some kind of educational fund after discharge." I was surprised by this information. "We haven't discussed that specifically yet. I'm meeting with him tomorrow to talk about post-discharge plans." "Oh," she sounded momentarily confused. "He seemed quite certain. Said he was planning to finish his business degree and potentially pursue an MBA if the initial structure worked. Out. The presumption was concerning, not because the educational direction was problematic, but because Tyler appeared to be making assumptions about financial support that hadn't yet been discussed, much less agreed upon. It suggested the entitlement patterns might still be active despite therapeutic progress. "We'll certainly discuss options tomorrow," I replied non-committally. His education was interrupted when his previous business failed, so completing his degree could be a constructive step. After ending the call, I sat with the discomfort of this new information. Was Tyler genuinely focused on educational growth, or simply identifying what he perceived as the most likely avenue to access financial support? The treatment team had reported consistent progress, but recovery from long-standing patterns rarely followed a straightforward path. I decided to approach tomorrow's family session with cautious openness, ready to present the Educational Achievement Fund concept if appropriate, but equally prepared to establish firmer boundaries if Tyler's approach suggested continuing manipulation rather than authentic change. The treatment facility occupied a peaceful campus on the outskirts of Philadelphia. Its therapeutic atmosphere created through thoughtful architecture and landscaped grounds rather than institutional design. As I signed in at reception for the family session, I noticed Tyler waiting in the adjacent courtyard, reading what appeared to be a textbook rather than scrolling through social media, as would have been typical before treatment. He looked up as I approached, his smile tentative but seemingly genuine. "Dad, thanks for coming." "Of course," I replied, noting positive changes in his appearance, healthy weight restoration, clear eyes, and a general sense of physical well-being that had been notably absent during the acute phase of his crisis. "How are you feeling about next week's discharge?" "Nervous," he admitted directly, another departure from his previous tendency to project unwarranted confidence. "Dr. Mendelsohn says that's normal and actually a good sign. Means I'm taking it seriously rather than assuming everything will magically be fixed." We were joined by Dr. Rebecca Mendelsohn, Tyler's primary therapist throughout the residential program, a composed woman in her 40s with an attentive manner that balanced warmth and professional boundaries. "Mr. Harrison, thank you for participating today," she greeted me as we moved to a comfortable meeting room. "Tyler has been working thoughtfully on his discharge planning, and family support systems represent a critical component of successful transition." The session began with Tyler sharing insights from his treatment experience, the recognition of how substance use had distorted his decision-making, the patterns of grandiosity that had masked profound insecurity, and the compulsive pursuit of external validation through financial success rather than authentic achievement. "One of the hardest realizations," he explained with surprising vulnerability, "was understanding how I'd twisted normal parental boundaries into evidence that you didn't believe in me or support me. Every time you questioned a business proposal or declined to fund an idea, I interpreted it as rejection rather than appropriate parental guidance." Dr. Mendelsohn nodded encouragingly. "Tyler has been working on distinguishing between actual support, which sometimes involves setting boundaries and allowing natural consequences, and the enabling he was seeking that would have perpetuated harmful patterns." This therapeutic framing aligned remarkably well with the Educational Achievement Fund concept, suggesting that Tyler's treatment had indeed created meaningful shifts in his understanding of healthy support structures. "That relates to what I hoped we might discuss today," Tyler continued, glancing at his notes in a manner that suggested preparation rather than spontaneous manipulation. "I've been thinking about how to rebuild after discharge, not just avoiding the negative patterns but actively creating something constructive." He outlined a thoughtful plan that included completing his business degree, continuing outpatient therapy, attending recovery support meetings, and eventually applying his educational background to legitimate business opportunities developed through proper planning and mentorship, rather than impulsive execution. "I know I've forfeited any right to financial support," he acknowledged, his tone reflecting genuine accountability rather than strategic self-deprecation. And I understand that rebuilding trust will require consistent demonstration of different choices over time, not just promises or plans. The maturity in this framing was encouraging, though I remained mindful of Caroline's comment about Tyler's apparent certainty regarding financial assistance. Was this presentation authentic growth, or sophisticated impression management developed during treatment? I've actually been considering a structured approach that might support educational goals while maintaining appropriate boundaries, I said carefully, observing his reaction closely. Not an open-ended arrangement, but something specifically designed to facilitate legitimate educational advancement with built-in accountability measures. Rather than the immediate entitled enthusiasm I feared, Tyler responded with thoughtful consideration. That sounds potentially helpful, though. I'd want to understand the structure and responsibilities involved. I'm trying to approach things differently now, building steadily rather than looking for quick solutions or easy funding. Dr. Mendelsohn observed our exchange with clinical attention. Tyler, this seems like an opportunity to practice the communication skills we've been developing, specifically being direct about your needs and expectations, while respecting boundaries and avoiding assumptions. Tyler nodded, taking a measured breath before continuing with greater directness. I mentioned the possibility of educational support to Aunt Caroline yesterday, which wasn't appropriate since we hadn't actually discussed it yet. That was falling back into old patterns, making assumptions about financial help and trying to create pressure through third-party expectations. The self-awareness in this acknowledgement was striking, not just recognizing the behavior, but articulating its manipulative nature without defensive justification. I appreciate that recognition. I responded honestly. It suggests the treatment process is creating meaningful insight. For the remainder of the session, we discussed the Educational Achievement Fund concept in general terms, the purpose-restricted nature of the funding, the evaluation requirements for proposed uses, the milestone-based structure for additional resources, and the mandatory continuation of therapeutic support. This isn't an inheritance or entitlement, I clarified, watching carefully for signs of entitlement or resistance. It's a structured opportunity to rebuild through education and legitimate business development with appropriate guardrails and accountability measures. Tyler's response was measured and thoughtful. It sounds like a potential framework that recognizes both the opportunity to rebuild and the reality that I've demonstrated very poor judgment in the past. I'd like to review the specific details. Once they're available, understanding that accepting such support would mean accepting the accountability structures that come with it. As the session concluded, Dr. Mendelsohn offered her professional assessment. Tyler has made significant progress during the residential program, particularly in developing insight into the patterns that led to his breakdown. The transition to independent living will present new challenges, and structured support combined with appropriate boundaries offers the best foundation for continued recovery. Walking Tyler back to his residential unit before departing, I found myself cautiously hopeful about the changes treatment had facilitated. The entitled, manipulative patterns that had characterized his approach to financial matters for years seemed genuinely disrupted, replaced by a more grounded perspective on appropriate support and personal responsibility. "Dad," Tyler said as we reached the door to his unit, "I want you to know I've been thinking a lot about what you said during one of your earlier visits, about being happy in your teaching career regardless of compensation, finding meaning in the work itself rather than external validation." I nodded, remembering the conversation. "I've never experienced that," he continued thoughtfully. "Never felt satisfied with any achievement because I was always immediately focused on the next bigger thing, the next validation. I think I'd like to understand what that feels like, to value the process and purpose rather than just the outcome or recognition." The insight revealed a potential path toward healing that transcended financial considerations entirely, a fundamental shift in how Tyler might measure success and find fulfillment in his life moving forward. That understanding is worth more than any financial support I could possibly provide, I told him sincerely. And it's something you've earned. Through difficult personal work, not something anyone could simply give you. As I drove away from the treatment facility, I found myself reflecting on the parallel journeys Tyler and I had undertaken over these past months. His toward recovery, and mine toward integration of my previously separated identities. Both processes involved painful dismantling of constructed personas, honest assessment of misguided choices, and emergence of more authentic versions of ourselves. The Harrison Educational Foundation office was quiet when I arrived later that afternoon, my assistant having departed after completing the day's administrative tasks. I settled at my desk to review the final documentation for the Educational Achievement Fund, making minor adjustments based on insights from the family session. A stack of thank you letters from the Foundation's first grant recipients waited for my attention, teachers expressing gratitude for professional development opportunities, administrators describing the impact of curriculum innovation funding, parents sharing how scholarships would transform their children's educational prospects. The financial literacy curriculum your foundation funded has already changed how our students understand money, wrote one high school teacher. They're learning not just about financial mechanics, but about the relationship between resources, values, and life choices, lessons that transcend mere dollars and cents. The observation captured perfectly what I had attempted to teach Tyler. Throughout his life, though perhaps without sufficient clarity or consistency, money itself was merely a tool, neither inherently meaningful nor inherently corrupting. The wisdom lay in understanding its proper place within a well-lived life, using it purposefully without being defined or limited by its presence or absence. As spring deepened toward summer, the Educational Achievement Fund became operational, providing structured support for Tyler's return to university while maintaining appropriate boundaries through professional oversight and milestone requirements. His initial approach to this opportunity demonstrated encouraging responsibility, selecting courses thoughtfully, establishing relationships with academic advisors, and maintaining consistent engagement with outpatient therapy. The Foundation's work expanded simultaneously, developing new programs to support innovative teaching methods and providing resources for students who demonstrated academic potential despite economic challenges. My daily life found a new rhythm that integrated teaching experience, financial acumen, and philanthropic purpose in ways that no longer required artificial separation. Caroline joined me for dinner at my home one evening as summer arrived in earnest, bringing fresh vegetables from her garden and curious questions about this new chapter in both my life and Tyler's. "He seems different," she observed as we enjoyed meal on the back patio. "More grounded somehow. Less frantically trying to impress everyone with grand plans, and more focused on simply doing the work." The treatment created space for genuine reflection, I agreed, though sustainable change will require ongoing effort and support. She studied me thoughtfully, sipping her iced tea. "And you seem different too, Richard. More integrated somehow, as if parts of you that were kept separate are finally working together." Her observation was perceptive. The careful compartmentalization that had characterized my life for decades, the teacher identity entirely separate from the investor identity, had given way to something more cohesive and authentic. "I'm learning that some boundaries I thought were necessary might actually have been limitations," I acknowledged, "including those I maintained with family." Caroline nodded, accepting this indirect acknowledgement of how my financial secrecy had affected our relationship. "I've been thinking about something Tyler said during my last visit. He mentioned that you taught him the most valuable lesson without explicitly teaching it at all." "Oh?" I was curious what insight Tyler had identified. He said, watching, "You established the foundation showed him that true wealth isn't measured by consumption or status symbols, but by the positive impact you create with whatever resources you have, whether that's knowledge, time, money, or influence." The observation suggested a fundamental shift in Tyler's perspective. From viewing wealth primarily as a means to personal validation and status, to understanding it as a potential vehicle for meaningful contribution. That's a perspective that took me decades to fully appreciate, I admitted. If Tyler has genuinely internalized it through this difficult experience, perhaps something transformative has emerged from what initially seemed like tragedy. As darkness settled over the garden and fireflies began their luminous dance among the summer flowers, Caroline and I continued our conversation about family, purpose, values, and the unexpected wisdom that sometimes emerges from our most painful mistakes and misguided choices. The path ahead remained uncertain in many respects. Tyler's recovery would likely include both progress and setbacks. The foundation's work would face challenges and limitations despite abundant resources. My own journey toward fully integrated identity would continue evolving through this new chapter of life. But certain truths had crystallized through these months of upheaval and revelation. Truths about the proper place of wealth within a meaningful life, about the difference between enabling and supporting those we love, about the possibility of transformation through even our most difficult experiences when faced with courage and honesty. My son had emptied what he believed was my entire retirement account, never suspecting the offshore millions that represented my actual financial position. That betrayal had initiated a painful but ultimately transformative collapse of carefully maintained separations between different aspects of my life and identity. The lessons emerging from that collapse were available now not just to Tyler and me, but to every student, teacher, and family touched by the Harrison Educational Foundation. Lessons about authentic success, purposeful resources, and the profound truth that our most valuable legacies are measured not by what we accumulate, but by what we contribute. As fireflies illuminated the summer garden, I found myself experiencing a unique form of contentment, not the careful satisfaction of successful compartmentalization that had characterized previous decades, but the more complex peace that comes from integration, authenticity, and purposeful engagement with both the challenges and opportunities of a fully revealed life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.